I was able to stack up 30,443 points for deal damage to shredders during a night raid on Stellamontis. Now for my equipment, I brought in a Kanto with 7 stacks of ammo. I'd actually recommend swapping this out for a Venator or something else that you like. The Kanto was not terribly effective at dealing with the smaller arc enemies without burning a ton of ammo. A Hole Cracker with 6 stacks of ammo, though I'd recommend bringing in 7 to 8 at least. I nearly ran out by the end of the round, and part of that was just due to having a lot more flyers that I had to deal with. I brought 9 stacks of adrenaline shots, but you can get away with 7 to 8, a couple of light shields, and then a snap hook and zip lines. Now once you spawn in, you want to head for one of the major areas where shredders will spawn in. Now I'm going to walk you through where the spawns are, but keep in mind that RNG does play a bit of a role in this challenge and specifically on this map. I'm going to give you a couple examples of how that RNG might affect you between games so you're aware of it and can be ready for it if it happens to you. Also, I want to walk you through how to think about building a dynamic route in real time. As you can do this challenge in 101 different ways, the route that you take doesn't really matter, but you have to be aware of where players are in your game and how long it's been since you've been through an area. So let's start with where you're going to find shredders on this map. There are 4 in medical research, 1 in loading bay, 2 in atrium, 2 in lobby, 3 in the cultural archives, 2 in sandbox A, 2 in sandbox B, 1 being in the sandbox and then 1 being at the control room, 1 that will spawn near the seed vault extraction midway through the game, and then 1 in lobby metro. So I'm going to walk you through the route that I use and the path that I took, but before we jump into that, I want to show you this kind of crude animation that I put together to help you understand how to design a route in real time. But at a high level, what you want to assume is that shredders will start to respawn anywhere from 60 to 90 seconds after you've left a space. Now that timer can change a whole lot depending on how many raiders are in the area and active after the shredders have been taken out. So let me walk you through an example that I put together. These 4 red squares essentially represent a hot zone, and a hot zone means that there are shredders there to be eliminated. So let's say that you start in medical research and you take out the set of shredders that are there, and then you rotate through the assembly into the lobby. After you have left the medical research space, that area starts to cool off and it will cool down until it's blue. Now for this demonstration, just assume that once it goes to full blue, that means that shredders have returned and are ready to be eliminated again. So now you've made it into the lobby and medical research is beginning to cool off. So let's say you take out another 2 shredders in lobby and then you rotate into the atrium. Notice how medical research is still cooling off and now you have lobby cooling off. And now after you've taken out the 2 shredders in atrium, that begins to cool off. So say that you moved into the cultural archives and then you take out all 3 that are there. You can see that medical research is now pretty much ready for you to come back to it, and lobby and atrium are a little bit behind where that one is at. The more that you can keep track in real time of how long you've been away from a space, that will help you maximize the number of shredders that you can get to. Now, I know this was a bit of a crude demonstration, but definitely feel free to let me know if it was helpful or if it just made it even more confusing for you so I can figure out how to make it better for the next run for you guys. So let's go ahead and jump into the route itself. So I spawned right by the robotic sandboxes, so that's where I wanted to check. It's somewhat common to not have shredders spawned in right at the start of the game. Sometimes it can take anywhere from 1 to 2 minutes for them to spawn in after the match start. So because there's no shredders there, I wanted to rotate up to the lobby because there is always a set of shredders at the start of the game in the lobby area. Moving through Metro can be a little bit risky because there's usually a lot of pops and fireballs. And it was at this point that I realized my Kanto was kicking way too hard. It was going to be difficult to manage through this game. So lobby in the beginning of the match can be extremely dangerous because there's a lot of flyers plus the shredders that are on the map at that time. Now the Hole Cracker can make good work of all these enemies, but you need to be aware of how dangerous it can get when they all start to stack up and swarm you. Between the Hornets and the Fireflies, they can add damage to you really quick and put you into a really dangerous spot. There are some lobbies where it's just going to be a lot more aggressive than other lobbies. You're going to essentially fight one enemy and pull 10 more, and this is just one of those lobbies that I had. In your games, you're going to have to be aware of when you're putting yourself into a bad spot and when you need to abandon the rotation that you're currently in to get yourself to safety. So as I was getting swarmed from everything that came up from Metro, I bailed out just to reset and get myself back to stabilized, and then I can go back into the lobby and get the eliminations. So now you can see there's a shredder that spawned in the robotic sandbox, and now I can just snap hook back up to where I was and head back into the lobby to pick up the other shredder elimination. In general, if you find that there's a lobby that's essentially hyper aggressive once you spawned in my experience, this is usually a good sign that you're in a lobby that's going to have a higher volume of shredders being spawned in. That might just be my own conspiracy theory, but across all the games that I've played, the games where I can score the highest are the ones where I get the really aggressive starts. So once I finished up in lobby, I used my snap hook to go up into Business Center. Now, Business Center is a bit of a random gamble for whether or not you're going to have shredders. So like I was saying in the beginning, RNG can play a pretty substantial role in being able to set a high score in this challenge. And the Business Center is a great place to show you what I mean by that. So I attempted this challenge 3 different times before I got this score. And so I'm going to put these attempts side by side, all going through the Business Center to show you what I mean. In 2 out of 3 of the games that I played, there wasn't a shredder that spawned in the Business Center, but during the round that I got the high score in, I had a shredder that was consistently spawning there. Business Center essentially has a random pool of enemies that will be spawned in. Sometimes it can be a lot of ticks, sometimes it's a lot more pops and fireballs, sometimes there's a shredder, and sometimes there isn't. In general, if something hasn't spawned in at the beginning of the match or in the first 5 to 10 minutes or so, it's not going to spawn in for the rest of the match. So you need to make a decision whether or not the shredder not spawning is a big deal for you or not. To put that into perspective, the games where I didn't have a shredder spawning in, I ended up getting about 27 to 28,000 points. And then the game where I had the shredder spawning in, I was able to break that 30K. Now from the Business Center, I rotated down to the Cultural Archives. The Cultural Archives is similar to the lobby. It can be very, very dangerous if you're not careful. You'll find up to 3 shredders in this area, and it's usually pretty consistent throughout all of the rounds that you'll get the 3 shredders here. But on top of the shredders, you have a ton of ticks, a couple of fireballs, and a couple of pops. These enemies tend to like to swarm you all at the same time, so you need to be super careful not to let a tick roam that then jumps on your back right as a shredder is about to attack you. After taking out the 3 shredders inside of the Cultural Archives, I rotated out towards the Seed Vault through the little shortcut so I could move over to the Robotic Sandboxes. Now remember, I spawned in at the Robotic Sandboxes in the beginning of the round, and there weren't shredders there up until a couple minutes after the round started. So now it's been about 2 minutes since I've been there, and let's see how the shredders look once I get over to the sandbox I started in. So there was no shredder that spawned in Sandbox B, so I just ignored the rest of the enemies and then moved up to the control room. Now the control room has one shredder that will roam outside of it, and in general, I noticed that there's a lot less raiders that seem to come up for this specific shredder. It's one of my favorites to get because it's almost up constantly. And once I finished up with the control room shredder, I rotated back down to the robotic sandbox that I started in, overlooking it from the balcony of the control room, and you can see a shredder was spawned in. So just about 2 minutes after I was in that area, a respawn occurred. Now dropping out of the control room into the robotic sandbox is super sketchy because the area that connects the 2 robotic sandboxes together usually has a bunch of fireballs and pops that will all swarm you the second you hit the ground. So just be ready for that. Make sure you have your primary weapon out and you're ready to deal with it. Now from the robotic sandbox, I essentially take a bit of a gamble. Medical research can have a ton of shredders to eliminate and give you a good amount of score. But getting across to medical research is either a very long run if you run through the assembly area from Robotic Sandbox, or you can take a shortcut through the loading bay, but then the loading bay is usually pretty dangerous with a lot of flyers, maybe a bastion, maybe a vaporizer. It just depends on the round. So you can essentially slow yourself down even more by going through loading bay if you get swarmed by a ton of enemies. But once you take out those enemies, it's a really quick rotation over to the medical research area. And like I said, it can give you a great volume of points for your score. So using a zip line, you can zip line from the ground outside of the robotic sandboxes up to the area just outside of medical research, and then rotate into it to get the shredder eliminations. Now inside medical research, you can have up to 3 shredders. And if players are not in that area, you should be able to get all 3 to have spawned. Now there's also going to be pops, ticks, and fireballs, so just like the other major areas, it is super risky to go through this space. So just be ready, make sure your hole cracker and your primary weapon are reloaded before you go into the area. Shredders will spawn all over the research area. They can be on the bottom floor or the top floor, so just pay attention to the audio and keep an eye out for where they are. You also need to pay attention for sentry turrets, which will spawn in this area pretty frequently. and they can be put in some pretty sneaky areas to get some sneaky angles on you and shoot you in the back if you're not careful. So make sure you're clearing out the sentry turrets as well. Now, leaving medical research towards the central corridor, you can have a shredder that spawns in the hallway outside of medical. I was unlucky in this rotation, so I just decided to move through the assembly area and then back down towards the robotic sandboxes. Now, since I had already been through this area, you can see that there weren't respawns that would come back in time. I was here too recently and I didn't give it enough time to get respawns. So I just moved through the space up to the other robotic sandbox, and then the shredder that wasn't there in the last rotation is now there, and I can continue my farm. So as you can see, my rotation was not just a singular circle, and a big part of that is just adjusting to what's going on in the game and understanding where I need to move to and where I haven't been in a little bit of time. So this is essentially how you want to run your route overall, is try and pick the areas that you're finding the shredders respawning in the most and rotate to those as much as possible, but giving some time in between each of the rotations to let respawns happen. Try not to get in your head if you're having droughts of going through areas and you're not seeing shredders. It's okay and totally normal to have essentially one full rotation of enemies not spawning in. But if it's more than one rotation where you're not seeing enemies spawn in, you either need to decide to leave the match, requeue, and try again, or completely change up your rotation and go to a different area to allow things to respawn and hopefully get you back into a better rotation. Now, outside of that, there really isn't a ton more to this challenge. It really is just a process of rotating as best you can into the different spaces and picking off the enemies as you go. Once you've stacked up enough points and you're happy with your score, head back to Speranza, collect any loot if you haven't already, and watch your score fly up the leaderboard. That's going to be it for me today, y'all. Thanks for watching.